The communal Sacrificial Valley smells like frozen earth and betrayal. Abigail Moore knows this because she's lying in it right now. Not hiding. Not resting. But left for dead with her wrists bound behind her back with thick, rough rope that's already rubbed her skin raw. The ceremonial markings beneath her. Ancient runes carved into stone that she can't see but can feel pressing into her cheek, are glowing faintly red in the gathering dusk. They're supposed to guide her spirit to the moon goddess. She's not dead yet, but she will be soon. The thin sacrificial dress they forced her into before they dragged her here does nothing against the mountain cold. Her fingers have gone numb hours ago, and now the numbness is creeping up her arms, into her chest. Her wolf is silent inside her. Has been silent since Roman's rejection shattered their bond in front of the entire pack. Since his father, Alpha Nero, smiled that cold smile and declared her fate with 2 words: unmated sacrifice. Above her, carrion birds circle, waiting. Abigail tries to focus on her breathing, but each inhale burns like ice in her lungs. She can hear them sometimes, the whispers of other omegas who were left here before her. The valley remembers. The stones remember. This is where the Crescent Moon Pack disposes of wolves they deem inconvenient. Wolves whose existence threatens the bloodline's purity. Wolves like her, with her pale hair and recessive genes and the fatal mistake of believing that love could transcend rank. "You were nothing but a childhood mistake, Abigail," Roman had said, his voice echoing through the ceremonial hall. "I, Roman Bernard, heir to the Crescent Moon Pack, reject you as my mate. You are unworthy of my mark, unworthy of my name, unworthy of standing beside an alpha." The pack had watched in silence. Not one wolf had spoken in her defense. Not one. And when Alpha Nero had stepped forward, Roman's father, the Alpha King himself, Abigail had foolishly hoped for mercy. But Nero's eyes had been as cold as the valley floor, and his words had sealed her fate. "To protect my son from the consequences of a broken bond, I invoke the ancient right. This Omega is declared unmated sacrifice. She will be given to the valley by nightfall." They'd bound her wrists, stripped her of her pack clothes, dressed her in the thin white sacrifice dress that marked her as an offering. And they'd left her here, in this desolate place where the territorial borders meet, where no pack claims jurisdiction, where wolves are left to die and no one is held accountable. Abigail's vision is starting to blur. She thinks about closing her eyes, about letting go, about surrendering to the cold and the dark and the absolute certainty that she will never be found, never be mourned, never be remembered as anything more than that weak Omega who couldn't hold her mate. But then she hears it. A sound that doesn't belong to the valley. Not the whisper of wind through ancient stones. Not the cry of hunting birds. Not the rustle of wolves moving through distant brush. A step. Heavy. Deliberate. Coming closer. Abigail's heart lurches. For one desperate, foolish moment, she thinks. Roman came back. He couldn't go through with it. He came back for me. But the scent that reaches her on the frozen wind is nothing like Roman's. This is older, darker, carrying the weight of centuries and power that makes her wolf, silent and broken as she is, suddenly stir with an instinct more ancient than pack law. Danger. And something else. Recognition. A shadow falls across her face, blocking out the last of the dying light. Abigail forces her eyes open, her vision swimming, and looks up into a face that will change everything. Alpha King Ilara. The ruthless king of the northern wolflands. The ancient, the feared, the wolf whose name is whispered as both warning and legend. He's supposed to be a myth, a story told to keep young wolves obedient. But he's standing over her now, impossibly real, impossibly close. His silver hair falling like moonlight around features that are both beautiful and terrifying. His eyes, burning gold, ancient and merciless, lock onto hers. And Abigail feels it. The snap of recognition. The surge of power. The sudden, overwhelming certainty that crashes through her broken bond like lightning through dead wood. "True mate." "Who?" Alpha King Ilara says, his voice low and deadly and promising absolute devastation. "Dare to leave my mate to die?" Abigail had known something was wrong the moment she'd entered the Grand Hall 3 days ago. The entire Crescent Moon pack had been assembled. Over 300 wolves packed into the ceremonial space, their eyes tracking her like she was prey. She'd worn her best dress, the soft blue one Roman said brought out her eyes, and she'd braided her dark hair the way his mother had taught her years ago when Abigail was just 14 and Roman's family had still pretended to tolerate her presence. She'd thought it was a celebration. Maybe an early mating announcement. Roman had been distant for weeks, but she'd convinced herself it was just the pressure of his upcoming alpha trials, the weight of eventually inheriting his father's title. They'd been inseparable since childhood. He'd held her hand through her first shift. He'd kissed her in the meadow behind the packhouse and promised her forever under a sky full of stars. She'd been so catastrophically wrong. Roman stood at the center of the hall on the raised alpha platform, his posture rigid and formal in a way she'd never seen before. He wore the ceremonial black leather of the alpha line, his dark hair slicked back, his jaw tight. His father, Alpha Nero, loomed beside him like a shadow given flesh, tall, silver-haired, and radiating the kind of cold authority that made weaker wolves drop their eyes and bare their throats instinctively. But it was Roman's expression that stopped Abigail's heart mid-beat. He looked at her like she was a stranger. No worse than that. Like she was nothing. Like she was something unpleasant he'd found on the bottom of his boot. Abigail Moore. Alpha Nero's voice boomed through the hall, echoing off the vaulted stone ceiling. Step forward. She'd obeyed, confusion and dread warring in her chest like two wolves tearing at each other. The crowd parted for her, creating a corridor of bodies that felt more like a gauntlet. No one met her eyes. Not even Maya, her closest friend since childhood, who stood near the back with her head bowed and her shoulders hunched. Not even old Thomas, who'd taught her to read when she was 6. Not even the Omega mothers who'd helped raise her after her own mother had died. The silence was deafening. "Roman," she'd whispered when she finally reached the platform, her voice trembling. "What's happening? Why is everyone?" He didn't answer. Didn't even look at her directly. His jaw was locked, his hands fisted at his sides, his entire body radiating tension. Up close, she could see the muscle ticking in his cheek, the way his throat worked as he swallowed hard. For one desperate, foolish moment, she thought maybe he was nervous. Maybe this was some kind of elaborate surprise. Some pack tradition she didn't know about because her bloodline was so diluted she'd never been fully integrated into the ancient ceremonies. Alpha Nero spoke instead, his voice cutting through her spiraling thoughts like a knife. "My son has something to tell you, Miss Moore." The formality of it. Miss Moore, not Abigail, not even the casual Abby Roman had called her since they were children, made her stomach drop. Roman finally raised his eyes. They were amber, the color of honey and sunlight, the eyes she'd stared into 1,000 times while he told her she was beautiful, that she was his, that nothing would ever come between them. Now they were completely empty. Hollow. Like someone had reached inside him and scooped out everything that made him Roman and left only this cold, practiced shell. "I, Roman Bernard, son of Alpha Nero Bernard, heir to the Crescent Moon pack and future Alpha King." His voice was steady, rehearsed, each word enunciated with crystal clarity. "Reject you, Abigail Moore, as my mate." The world tilted sideways. Abigail felt the bond, the fragile, newly formed thread that had connected them since her first shift 3 months ago, begin to fray. It started as a pulling sensation deep in her chest, like someone had hooked their fingers around her ribs and was slowly, methodically tearing them apart. Then it burned. Oh gods, it burned. Like acid in her veins, like her blood was turning to glass and shattering from the inside, like every nerve ending in her body was being set on fire simultaneously. "No," she gasped, reaching for him instinctively, desperately. "Roman, please, we're mates. You felt it too, I know you did. You can't just." "I reject you," he repeated, louder this time. Firm. Final. Absolute. The bond snapped. Abigail collapsed, her knees slamming into the stone floor with enough force that she felt something crack. The pain was beyond description, beyond anything she'd ever imagined pain could be. It was like being torn in half, like having her soul ripped out through her ribs one bloody piece at a time. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but scream, her voice raw and breaking as the severed bond tried desperately to reconnect and failed, over and over, each failed attempt sending fresh waves of agony through her body. The pack watched in absolute silence. No one moved to help her. No one spoke. They just stared, their faces ranging from pity to satisfaction to carefully blank indifference. Some of the younger wolves looked uncomfortable, but they didn't step forward. The older ones, the ones who'd always looked at her with barely concealed disdain because of her recessive genetics, looked almost pleased. When the worst of the pain had finally subsided enough for her to drag air into her lungs, when the screaming had faded to broken sobs and her throat was scraped raw, she looked up at Roman through tear-blurred eyes. "Why?" she choked out. "Roman, why? What did I do wrong?" He didn't answer. Didn't even flinch. His face could have been carved from marble for all the emotion it showed. Alpha Nero, however, smiled. It was a cold, satisfied expression that made Abigail's blood run ice-cold despite the lingering fire of the broken bond. "Because you are recessive, Miss Moore," he said simply, almost conversationally, as if they were discussing the weather. "Your wolf is weak. Your bloodline is diluted beyond recognition. Your genetics are inferior. And my son, the future Alpha King of the Crescent Moon Pack, cannot afford to be tied to an Omega who will produce nothing but disappointment and weakness in his offspring." Each word was a knife between her ribs. "You're a liability," Nero continued, circling her slowly like a predator examining wounded prey. "A mistake of nature. The moon goddess erred when she tied my son to something as pathetic as you. But fortunately, bonds can be broken. Weak links can be severed. And pack law allows us to correct the goddess's mistake." "But the bond," Abigail tried, her voice barely a whisper. "True mates are sacred. It's one of the oldest laws. You can't just." "Is irrelevant in the face of pack survival," Nero interrupted smoothly. "Article 7 of the ancient code states that an alpha may reject a mate if said mate poses a threat to the bloodline's strength. You, Miss Moore, are precisely such a threat. Your weakness would poison the Bernard line for generations." He gestured sharply, and 2 guards stepped forward from the shadows at the edge of the platform. Abigail recognized them. Marcus and Dev, wolves she'd grown up with, wolves who'd protected her when she was young and vulnerable. Now they looked at her with flat, empty eyes. "Under the authority granted to me by the ancient laws and the power vested in me as Alpha of the Crescent Moon Pack," Nero declared, his voice rising to fill the hall, "I declare Abigail Moore an unmated sacrifice. She will be taken to the Sacrificial Valley at dawn and left as an offering to appease the old spirits for the offense of a false bond. This is my judgment. This is pack law. So let it be done." The hall erupted, not in protest, but in shocked whispers and barely concealed relief that rippled through the crowd like wind through wheat. They were grateful. Actually, genuinely grateful that the embarrassment of their heir being mated to a weak, recessive Omega would be quietly, permanently erased. Some of the older wolves even nodded approvingly, as if Nero had made a difficult but necessary decision. Abigail's mind reeled. Sacrificial offerings were ancient, brutal, and supposedly obsolete. The practice involved binding an unmated wolf and leaving them in the valley to die of exposure or be torn apart by wild animals, a blood offering to the old gods that most packs had abandoned centuries ago as barbaric. "You can't," she gasped, looking desperately around the hall for someone. Anyone who would speak up. "Someone, please. This is murder. This is justice," Nero said coldly. "And it is already decided." Marcus and Dev grabbed her arms, hauling her to her feet with practiced efficiency. She fought them. Of course she fought them, but her wolf was too weak from the broken bond, her body too shattered by pain. They dragged her from the platform while the pack watched, and the last thing she saw before they pulled her through the massive oak doors was Roman. He stood exactly where he'd been, his amber eyes tracking her movement, his face still carved from ice. For just a fraction of a second, She thought she saw something flicker there. Regret, maybe, or grief. But then it was gone, replaced by that same terrible emptiness. She'd spent that night locked in the cellars beneath the packhouse, alone in the dark with the rats and the damp and the crushing weight of her shattered bond. No one came to see her. No one brought her food or water. She was already dead to them, already erased. At dawn, they'd dressed her in the thin white ceremonial gown, the kind reserved for sacrifice, transparent enough to show she had nothing to hide, torn strategically to prove she was unworthy of protection. They'd bound her wrists behind her back with rope so thick it immediately cut into her skin. And then they'd taken her to the valley. Roman had been there for that part. He'd held her arms while his father tied the knots, his grip firm and impersonal, like she was cargo instead of the girl who'd loved him since they were 8 years old. She tried to speak to him, to beg him one last time to remember what they'd had, but he'd turned away before she could form the words. The last thing he'd said to her, standing at the edge of the valley while his father's guards positioned her body on the sacrificial stones, was, "You should have been stronger." Then they'd left her there to die. Present, the Sacrificial Valley. Abigail doesn't hear him approach. One moment, she's alone with the carrion birds and the creeping cold. The next, the air itself seems to shift, the temperature dropping so fast that the moisture in the atmosphere crystallizes into tiny ice shards that glitter in the dying light. The birds scatter, shrieking in terror. And then she smells it. Pine and winter frost and something ancient and utterly dominant. The scent slams into her like a physical force, so overwhelming that even half dead and freezing, her wolf stirs for the first time since the rejection. "Mate," her wolf whispers, delirious. "Impossible," Abigail croaks. Her bond was severed. She felt it break. There's no way. A shadow falls over her. She forces her eyes open, a monumental effort, and looks up. The man standing above her is not a man at all. He's a force of nature given flesh. Tall, easily 6.5 feet, with long silver-white hair that falls past his shoulders and eyes the color of molten gold. His face is sharp and ageless, beautiful in the way a blade is beautiful, elegant and utterly lethal. He's wearing dark leather armor etched with symbols Abigail doesn't recognize, and when he moves, she sees the massive black wolf at his side, a beast the size of a small horse with eyes that glow like embers. "Who?" the man says, his voice a low rumble that seems to vibrate through the very ground. "Dare to leave my mate to die?" His mate. Abigail tries to speak, but her throat is too dry, her body too broken. The man, no, the Alpha, drops to one knee beside her. His golden eyes sweep over her bound wrists, her torn clothing, the ritualistic symbols carved into the ground around her body. His expression doesn't change, but the temperature drops another 10 degrees. "Sacrificial markings," he murmurs. "They tried to offer you to the old spirits." He tilts his head, studying her face. "Do you know who I am, little wolf?" Abigail shakes her head weakly. He leans closer, and she catches his scent again, that overwhelming, intoxicating mix of winter and power and home. "I am Ilara," he says quietly. "Alpha King of the northern wolflands. Ancient of the first blood. And you?" He reaches out, his fingers brushing her frozen cheek with surprising gentleness. "Are mine." Before Abigail can process his words, he moves. The ropes binding her wrists don't just loosen, they disintegrate, snapping like spider silk under the force of his strength. He lifts her effortlessly, cradling her against his chest, and the warmth of his body is so intense it's almost painful. "Tell me their names," Ilara says. His voice still soft but edged with something dark and deadly. "Tell me the names of the wolves who did this to you, and I will teach them the true meaning of sacrifice." Abigail's mind is spinning. This can't be real. Alpha King Ilara is a legend, a ghost story told to wolf pups to make them behave. He's been gone for centuries, ruling his frozen northern territories in isolation. He doesn't involve himself in southern pack politics. And he certainly isn't here, holding her like she's something precious, calling her his mate. Roman Bernard, she whispers, her voice barely audible. And his father, Alpha Nero. Ilara goes very, very still. Repeat that, he says. Alpha Nero Bernard. Abigail manages. Of the Crescent Moon Pack. He declared me a sacrifice. He. Nero. Ilara interrupts, his voice flat. Alpha Nero. Abigail nods weakly. For a long moment, Ilara says nothing. Then, slowly, he begins to laugh. It's not a warm sound. It's the kind of laugh that makes Abigail's survival instincts scream. The kind that promises blood and ruin. Oh, my son, Ilara murmurs. His golden eyes blazing with something terrible and bright. What have you done? If this story has held you this long, subscribing is how you help it continue. Thank you. Now back to the story. Abigail doesn't hear him approach. In fairness, she's barely conscious anymore. Her mind floating somewhere between waking and the darkness that keeps trying to pull her under. The cold has moved past pain into something worse, a distant numbness that feels almost peaceful. She knows what that means. Her body is shutting down, prioritizing her vital organs in a last desperate attempt at survival. Soon even that won't be enough. The carrion birds are closer now. She can hear their talons scratching against stone, their harsh cawing as they argue over which piece of her they'll claim first. Her vision has narrowed to a tunnel, the edges going black and fuzzy. She thinks about her mother, dead these 10 years, and wonders if she'll see her soon. Wonders if her mother will be ashamed of her for being so weak, so easily discarded. Then the air shifts. It happens so suddenly that even in her deteriorating state, Abigail feels it. The temperature doesn't just drop, it plummets, the moisture in the atmosphere crystallizing so fast she can actually hear it, a faint tinkling sound like breaking glass. The change is so extreme, so absolute, that frost spreads across the sacrificial stones in intricate patterns, creeping toward her body like living things. The carrion birds scatter with shrieks of pure terror, their wings beating frantically as they flee into the darkening sky. Then she smells it. Pine and winter frost and something else. Something ancient and utterly dominant that bypasses her conscious mind and speaks directly to the most primal part of her wolf. The scent slams into her with physical force, so overwhelming that her dying wolf, the part of her that's been silent and broken since Roman's rejection, suddenly surges to life with desperate, clawing intensity. Mate, her wolf snarls, no longer the weak, whimpering thing that's been curled up and bleeding in the back of her mind. This is something different, something powerful and feral and absolutely certain. Asterisk mate. Claim, asterisk. No, Abigail tries to say, but her voice won't work properly, coming out as barely a croak. Her bond was severed. She felt it snap, felt it die. There's no way she can have another mate. The moon goddess doesn't work that way. True mates are once in a lifetime, and hers rejected her, broke her, threw her away like garbage. A shadow falls over her, blocking out what little light remains in the purple-bruised sky. She forces her eyes open, a monumental effort that takes more strength than she thought she had left, and looks up. The man standing above her isn't a man at all. He's something else entirely, something that makes every instinct she has scream in conflicting directions. Half demanding she submit and bare her throat, half demanding she run as fast and far as her dying body will carry her. He's tall, easily 6.5 feet, with a warrior's build that speaks of centuries of violence and survival. His hair is long, falling past his shoulders in waves of pure silver white that catch the dying light like frost. His face is sharp and ageless, neither young nor old but something in between, beautiful in the way a blade is beautiful, elegant and utterly lethal. But it's his eyes that stop her struggling heart completely. They're gold. Not amber like Roman's honey-colored eyes, but true molten gold, bright and burning and ancient beyond measure. They're the eyes of something that existed before the packs, before the territories, before the carefully constructed hierarchy of Alpha and Omega. They're the eyes of a predator that has never, not once in its long existence, been prey. He's wearing armor of dark leather and metal etched with symbols she doesn't recognize, patterns that seem to shift and move in her peripheral vision. At his side stands a massive black wolf, not shifted but fully wolf, larger than any she's ever seen, easily the size of a small horse. Its eyes glow like embers in the growing darkness, and when it breathes, frost forms in the air. The man tilts his head, studying her with an intensity that makes her feel simultaneously naked and seen in a way she's never experienced before. When he speaks, his voice is a low rumble that seems to vibrate through the very ground beneath her, through her bones, through the marrow itself. "Who," he says, each word deliberate and heavy with barely leashed violence, "dare to leave my mate to die?" The world stops. His mate, he called her his mate. This impossible, terrifying, ancient being just called her Abigail Moore, the weak recessive Omega who wasn't good enough for an alpha heir. His mate. She tries to speak, to tell him he's made a mistake, that she's already been rejected and broken and used up, but her throat is too dry, her tongue too thick and clumsy. All that comes out is a broken sound somewhere between a whimper and a sob. The man, the alpha, because there's no question that's what he is, what he's always been, drops to one knee beside her with a fluid grace that seems impossible for someone his size. His golden eyes sweep over her methodically, cataloguing every injury, every indignity. They linger on her bound wrists, the rope cutting deep enough that blood has dried in dark crusts around the fibers. They track across her torn ceremonial gown, the strategic rips that were meant to prove her unworthiness. They see the ritualistic symbols carved into the ground around her body, the ancient markings that designate her as an offering. His expression doesn't change. His face remains carved from ice and fury, but the temperature drops another 10 degrees. The frost on the stones spreads further, crawling up the vertical surfaces of the valley walls, turning everything it touches crystalline and deadly. "Sacrificial markings," he murmurs. His voice soft now but somehow more terrifying for its gentleness. It's the voice of someone who's seen civilizations rise and fall, who's ended bloodlines and raised territories to ash. The old way. The blood offering to appease the spirits. His golden eyes snap back to her face, and she sees something burning there that makes her breath catch. "They bound you, tore your clothes, left you in the sacred valley to die slowly, torn apart by scavengers or taken by exposure, whichever came first. They followed the ritual perfectly." He reaches out, and Abigail flinches instinctively, expecting pain because that's all she's known for days now. But his fingers brush her frozen cheek with a gentleness that seems impossible from someone who radiates such controlled violence. His touch is warm. No, not just warm, burning hot like touching the sun, and she involuntarily leans into it despite her fear because she's been so cold for so long. "Do you know who I am, little wolf?" he asks. Abigail manages to shake her head, just barely. The movement makes the world spin, and she tastes copper on her tongue. Internal bleeding, probably. Her body is failing faster now. He leans closer, and his scent envelopes her completely. Pine and winter frost and power, and something that smells like home in a way she's never experienced. It's intoxicating and terrifying, and her wolf is howling inside her, demanding she submit and claim and accept all at once. "I am Ilara," he says, and his name lands like a physical blow. "Alpha King of the Northern Wolflands. Ancient of the First Blood. Lord of the Frozen Reaches and Guardian of the Old Ways." His hand moves from her cheek to her throat, not threatening but possessive. His fingers spanning the entire width of her neck with room to spare. "And you, little wolf, are mine." The declaration rings through the valley like a bell, echoing off the stone walls with supernatural clarity. It's not a question, not a request. It's an absolute statement of fact, delivered with a kind of certainty that reshapes reality itself. "I was rejected," Abigail manages to whisper, needing him to understand before he wastes his time on someone already broken. "My mate, he broke the bond. I'm already." "No." The word is flat, absolute, allowing for no argument. Ilara's golden eyes bore into hers with an intensity that feels like it's seeing straight through to her soul. "What you had was a weak tie to a worthless whelp who didn't deserve to breathe the same air as you. What we have." His hand tightens fractionally on her throat, not choking but claiming, is inevitable, ancient, written in the bones of the world before the first pack ever howled at the moon. I have walked this earth for 8 centuries, little wolf, waiting for the scent that would call to the deepest part of me. And here you are, half dead in a sacrificial valley, smelling of betrayal and frozen earth and mine. Before Abigail can process his words, before she can tell him about the impossibility of second mates, before she can explain that she's too broken to be anything to anyone, he moves. His hands blur, faster than she can track, and the ropes binding her wrists don't just loosen or untie. They explode. The thick fibers that had held her immobile for hours simply disintegrate into dust and fragments, destroyed so completely and with such casual violent efficiency that she can't even comprehend the strength required. The sound is like thunder compressed into a single moment, a sharp crack that echoes through the valley. The relief of pressure is immediate and overwhelming. Blood rushes back into her hands, bringing with it excruciating pins and needles that make her gasp and nearly black out. But before the pain can fully register, Ilara is lifting her, gathering her into his arms like she weighs nothing at all, like she's made of glass and air. One arm slides beneath her knees, the other supports her back, and suddenly she's cradled against his chest with her cheek pressed against leather and metal that should be cold but radiates heat like a forge. The warmth of his body is so intense it's almost painful, driving back the cold that's been killing her by inches. She can feel his heartbeat through the armor. Steady, slow, powerful, ancient. Each beat seems to resonate with something deep inside her, calling to her damaged wolf, coaxing it back to life with patient, relentless certainty. The massive black wolf presses close to Ilara's side, and she realizes with dawning shock that it's offering its warmth too, its breath hot against her frozen legs, its body heat adding to the cocoon of safety that Ilara is creating around her. The beast's ember eyes meet hers briefly, and she sees intelligence there, ancient and knowing. This isn't just a companion animal. This is something older, something that chose to walk beside Ilara through the centuries. Better, Ilara murmurs. His voice a low rumble she can feel through his chest. He's not talking to her but about her, assessing her condition with the clinical efficiency of someone who's seen countless injuries over countless years. Your core temperature is dangerously low. Internal bleeding likely from exposure and shock. Dehydration. Possible pneumonia. The bond severance trauma. His jaw tightens. That will scar, but you'll survive it. You'll survive all of it because you belong to me now, and I do not permit what is mine to break. He starts walking, each step smooth and purposeful despite the uneven terrain. The valley floor is treacherous, loose stones and hidden hollows that could turn an ankle or cause a fall, but he navigates it like he knows every inch of it, like he's walked this ground 1,000 times before. Tell me their names, he says, and though his voice remains soft, underneath it is something dark and deadly that promises blood and ruin and the ending of worlds. Tell me the names of the wolves who did this to you, who dared to bind and abandon what belongs to me, and I will teach them the true meaning of sacrifice. I will show them what the old gods actually demand. I will paint these valley stones with their bloodline and leave their pack as a warning to every wolf in the southern territories who thinks the ancient laws are merely tradition. Abigail's mind is still spinning, struggling to process what's happening. Alpha King Ilara is a legend, a ghost story told to wolf pups to make them behave. He's the boogeyman that alphas invoke when they want to remind their packs that there are older, more dangerous things than them in the world. The oldest wolves in the Crescent Moon pack speak of him in whispers, the ancient one who disappeared into the frozen north 300 years ago after raising an entire territory that dared to challenge him. He doesn't involve himself in southern pack politics. He doesn't acknowledge the newer territories or their petty disputes over borders and bloodlines. And he certainly doesn't appear in sacrificial valleys to claim rejected omegas as mates. But he's here. He's real. And he's holding her like she's something precious, something worth burning the world for. Roman Bernard, she whispers, her voice barely audible even in the dead silence of the valley. Speaking his name feels like tearing open a wound that's only just begun to scab over. And his father, Alpha Nero. Ilara goes absolutely still. Not the stillness of a human pausing to think, but the complete absence of movement that only a predator can achieve. The kind of stillness that comes before explosive violence. Even his breathing stops. The massive wolf at his side freezes too, its ember eyes fixed on some distant point, its hackles rising slowly. The temperature drops again, so rapidly that Abigail sees her breath crystallize in the air between them. The frost that's been spreading across the valley suddenly accelerates, racing across every surface like wildfire in reverse, turning stone and earth and dead vegetation into glittering ice. "Repeat that," Ilara says, and his voice has gone flat in a way that makes Abigail's survival instincts scream even through her dying haze. It's the voice of someone who's just been told something that changes everything, something that transforms casual violence into personal vendetta. "Alpha Nero Bernard," she manages, fighting to get the words out past her damaged throat and her confusion at his reaction. "Of the Crescent Moon Pack. He's the one who declared me a sacrifice. He said the bond between Roman and me was a mistake, that I was recessive, that my bloodline would poison theirs. He invoked Article 7 of the ancient codes and had me bound and brought here and—" "Nero," Ilara interrupts, and his voice is still that terrible flat calm that feels like the moment before a storm breaks. *Alpha Nero. Currently ruling as Alpha of the Crescent Moon Pack. "Yes," Abigail says, bewildered now by the intensity of his reaction. "He's been Alpha for almost 30 years. His son Roman is the heir." "Why?" She doesn't get to finish because Ilara starts to laugh. It's not a sound of amusement. It's cold and sharp and utterly devoid of anything resembling joy. It's the laugh of someone who's just been handed the perfect, terrible irony by a universe with a cruel sense of humor. The sound echoes off the valley walls, multiplying and distorting until it sounds like dozens of voices laughing in harmony, and the frost spreads faster, racing across every surface until the entire valley glitters like it's been carved from diamond and filled with starlight. "Oh, my son," Ilara murmurs, and the words make Abigail's already struggling heart stutter and nearly stop. "My foolish, arrogant, short-sighted son. What have you done?" Abigail wakes to warmth. Not the feverish, desperate warmth of hypothermia's final stage, but real warmth, deep and penetrating and safe. She's lying on something impossibly soft, wrapped in furs that smell like pine and winter frost, and that overwhelming scent that makes her wolf purr contentedly in the back of her mind. For one blissful moment she thinks maybe everything was a dream. The rejection, the valley, the impossible ancient Alpha who called her his mate. Then she opens her eyes and sees the ceiling. It's not a ceiling. It's carved stone, raw mountain rock shaped by something far older than modern tools, etched with symbols that seem to writhe and shift in the flickering firelight. The chamber is massive, more cavern than room, with walls of dark granite and obsidian that catch and reflect the flames from the enormous fireplace dominating one wall. The fire itself burns with an unnatural quality, blue-white at its core, casting shadows that feel almost alive. She's in a bed large enough for 4 people, piled high with furs that look ancient, wolf pelts in shades of silver and black and pure white, each one massive enough to have come from wolves twice the size of any she's ever seen. The frame is carved from a single piece of dark wood, the headboard depicting a frozen forest with wolves running beneath a full moon. "You're awake." Abigail jerks upright, immediately regretting it as her body screams in protest. Everything hurts, her wrists where the ropes cut in, her chest where the bond broke, her core where the cold nearly killed her. But underneath the pain is something else, something warm and golden and alive that seems to be knitting her back together from the inside. Ilara sits in a massive chair near the fireplace, watching her with those molten gold eyes. He's removed his armor, dressed now in simple black clothing that somehow makes him look more dangerous rather than less. His silver-white hair is unbound, falling past his shoulders, and in the firelight he looks simultaneously ancient and ageless, like something carved from ice and given breath. "Where?" Abigail's voice cracks. Her throat is raw, damaged. "The northern fortress," Ilara says. His voice that same low rumble that seems to resonate in her bones. My home for the past 3 centuries. You've been unconscious for 2 days while your body recovered from the exposure and the bond trauma. He stands, moving with that same predatory grace, and approaches the bed. Drink this. He holds out a cup filled with something that steams and smells like herbs and honey. When she hesitates, his expression doesn't change, but something flickers in those golden eyes. I did not claim you from death's doorstep to poison you in my own fortress, little wolf. Drink. The liquid is warm and soothing, easing the rawness in her throat immediately. She can feel it working, some kind of healing tonic that's far more potent than anything the Crescent Moon Pack healers ever produced. When she finishes, he takes the cup and sets it aside, then sits on the edge of the bed. Your body is healing, he says, studying her with clinical intensity. The hypothermia has passed. The internal bleeding has stopped. Your wrists will scar but not permanently. The bond severance. His jaw tightens fractionally. That will take longer. The damage Roman Bernard inflicted goes deeper than flesh. Hearing Roman's name spoken with such cold disdain makes something twist in her chest. You called Nero your son, she whispers. In the valley. You said. I know what I said. Ilara's golden eyes bore into hers. And it was truth. Alpha Nero Bernard, current ruler of the Crescent Moon Pack, is my son. Which makes Roman Bernard, the whelp who rejected you, my grandson. The words land like physical blows. Abigail's mind reels, trying to process the impossible geometry of what he's telling her. But that would make you'd be over 800 years old, Ilara finishes calmly. I was born in the age before the great packs formed, when wolves still ran wild and the old gods walked among us. I helped establish the territorial system. I created half the laws that govern pack behavior today. And Nero, his voice goes cold, is my youngest son from my first mate, born 273 years ago. Abigail's breath catches. First mate. Something dark and terrible crosses Ilara's face, an expression of such profound grief and rage that it makes her wolf whimper and press close to her consciousness, seeking comfort. Her name was Lyanna. She was moonborn, blessed by the goddess herself with silver eyes and a wolf the color of starlight. We ruled the northern wolflands together for 300 years. We had 5 children. Nero was the youngest, the weakest, always hungry for power he hadn't earned. He stands, pacing to the fireplace, his broad back to her. 200 years ago, Lyanna went south to mediate a territorial dispute. She never returned. The wolves who accompanied her claimed she was killed in an ambush. Rogue wolves, they said, acting without pack sanction. I raised 3 territories looking for her killers and found nothing. No trail. No evidence. Just absence. Abigail watches the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands flex at his sides like he's restraining himself from violence even now, centuries later. What really happened? I didn't know. Not for certain. Not until I held you in that valley and smelled your bloodline. He turns and his golden eyes are blazing. You carry Lyanna's scent, little wolf. Faint, diluted by generations, but unmistakable. Her blood runs in your veins, which means you are descended from her line. And the only way that's possible is if she survived long enough to have a child we didn't know about before she was murdered. The implications crash over Abigail like a wave. You think Nero. I know Nero killed her, Ilara says flatly. Or had it done. He wanted the northern territories. He wanted to rule without his father's shadow. And Lyanna, brilliant, powerful Lyanna, would have stood in his way forever. So he arranged her death and made it look like random violence. Then he took the power I'd granted him as my heir and carved out his own territory in the south, far enough away that I wouldn't see what he was building, wouldn't realize he was rewriting history to erase me from it. He moves back to the bed, sitting close enough that she can feel the heat radiating from his body. The Crescent Moon Pack doesn't know Nero had a father. He's ruled for 3 decades, playing at Alpha King, telling his wolves he came from nowhere, that he built everything himself. He's hidden my existence because acknowledging me would destroy the myth he's constructed. It would mean admitting he's not the beginning of his bloodline but merely a branch of something far older and more powerful. Abigail's mind is racing. And Roman doesn't know either. About you. No. Which makes his rejection of you and your subsequent sacrifice particularly unfortunate for him. Ilara's smile is cold and sharp. Because in attempting to dispose of an inconvenient weak Omega, my grandson committed treason against ancient blood law. He tried to murder his own grandfather's true mate. The words hang in the air between them, heavy with implication. I don't understand, Abigail whispers. How can I be your true mate if you already had one? If Lyanna was. The goddess grants second chances to those who wait long enough, Ilara says quietly. I have walked this earth for 8 centuries, little wolf. I mourned Lyanna for 200 years. I built an empire of ice and isolation. I thought I would die alone, ancient and unmated. And then I felt you. Felt the pull of a bond so strong it dragged me out of my fortress and sent me south for the first time in 300 years. I followed your scent for 2 days straight, drawn by something I thought I'd never feel again. He reaches out, his fingers brushing her cheek with surprising gentleness. And I found you dying in a sacrificial valley, bound by ropes tied by my own bloodline, left to freeze and be torn apart because you weren't strong enough for an alpha who has a fraction of the power I possessed before he was born. So this is about revenge, Abigail says, and she hates how small her voice sounds. You're using me to punish Nero. To reclaim your territory. No. The word is absolute. Ilara's hand moves to cup her face, forcing her to meet his burning golden eyes. This is about justice for a mate murdered 2 centuries ago and for a mate nearly murdered 3 days ago. This is about teaching my son and grandson that there are consequences for betraying blood law and ancient bonds. But most importantly, his thumb traces her lower lip. This is about claiming what is mine. You were meant for me, Abigail Moore. Written in the stars before the first pack howled. And I will burn the entire southern territories to ash before I let anyone take you from me again. His certainty is overwhelming, absolute, terrifying in its intensity. But underneath her fear, underneath the shock and confusion, Abigail feels something else stirring. A spark of something that might be hope or might be rage, or might be the first ember of the power she's never been allowed to claim. What happens now, she asks. Ilara's smile is cold and promising. Now, little wolf, we go south. We return to the Crescent Moon Pack. And we show my son and grandson exactly what happens when they mistake mercy for weakness and try to sacrifice a queen. They arrive at dawn, when the Crescent Moon Pack is gathering for morning assembly. Abigail stands beside Ilara at the edge of the packlands, dressed in clothing that marks her as something entirely new. Gone is the torn sacrificial gown, replaced by deep midnight blue leather and silver fur that whispers against her skin. Her wrists are wrapped in soft bandages that hide the rope scars, but around her throat sits a collar of white gold etched with symbols that match Ilara's armor, ancient pack marks that declare her claimed, protected, untouchable. She can feel the pull of the territory boundaries, the way they recognize her former pack ties and recoil from what she's become. She's no longer the weak Omega they discarded. The bond with Ilara has changed her, strengthened her, given her wolf a power it never possessed before. Are you ready? Ilara asks, his voice low and steady beside her. Abigail thinks about Roman's cold amber eyes, about Nero's satisfied smile, about the pack watching in silence while they bound her and left her to die. She thinks about the rope cutting into her wrists, the freezing cold, the carrion birds circling overhead. Yes, she says and means it. They cross the boundary together. The effect is immediate and catastrophic. Every wolf in the territory feels it, the presence of something ancient and overwhelmingly dominant crashing through their carefully maintained hierarchy like a boulder through glass. Abigail watches wolves stumble, dropping to their knees instinctively, their bodies responding to a power their conscious minds can't even comprehend. The massive black wolf that's never far from Ilara's side throws back its head and howls, a sound that echoes across the entire territory, and the effect is like watching dominoes fall. Every wolf, from the weakest omega to the strongest warrior, bares their throat in submission. Every wolf except Nero. The alpha stands on the steps of the packhouse, his silver hair gleaming in the dawn light, his face carved from stone. Beside him, Roman looks pale and shaken, his amber eyes wide with something that might be fear or might be recognition. "Impossible," Nero breathes, but Abigail hears it even from this distance. "You're dead. You've been gone for 300 years, Ilara finishes, his voice carrying with supernatural clarity across the assembled pack. 300 years since I last set foot in the southern territories. 300 years since I discovered my mate murdered, and my youngest son vanished into the wilderness with stolen power and stolen land." He walks forward, each step measured and purposeful, and the wolves part before him like water before a blade. "Hello, Nero. Did you miss me?" The color drains from Nero's face. Around them, the pack is stirring, confusion rippling through the assembled wolves. Some of the oldest, the ones who remember stories from their grandparents, begin to whisper, their voices rising in horror and disbelief. "The Ancient One," someone gasps. "It's him. It's really him. Ilara of the northern wolflands," another whispers. "The first blood." "Father," Nero says, and the word is forced, dragged out like broken glass. This is unexpected." "Is it?" Ilara's smile is cold. "You tried to kill my mate, Nero. Did you think I wouldn't come?" Roman steps forward, his face twisted with confusion and dawning horror. "Grandfather." The word sounds strangled. He's my father," Nero confirms flatly. "The secret I've kept for 3 decades. The bloodline I've hidden to maintain my own power." He straightens, trying to muster dignity even as his wolves stare at him with betrayal written across their faces. But this changes nothing. The sacrifice was legal under ancient law. Article 7 clearly states. Article 7 states that an alpha may reject a mate who threatens the bloodline. Ilara interrupts, his voice dropping to something dangerous. It does not permit the murder of that mate. It does not allow for sacrificial offerings of unmated wolves. And it certainly does not protect an alpha who attempts to kill his own grandfather's true mate. The silence that follows is absolute. "True mate." Roman's voice breaks. He's staring at Abigail now, and she sees the moment understanding crashes over him. "No. She was mine. I rejected her. She was weak, recessive, she couldn't possibly. She carries the blood of my first mate Lyanna," Ilara says, and his voice could freeze fire. "The mate who was murdered 200 years ago on your grandfather's orders. The mate whose daughter survived long enough to continue the bloodline that led to Abigail Moore standing before you now." He stops directly in front of the packhouse steps, and Abigail watches Nero take an involuntary step back. "You didn't just reject a weak Omega boy. You rejected the descendant of a queen and then tried to sacrifice her like garbage. You committed treason against blood law, against sacred bonds, and against me." The temperature drops, frost spreading across the ground in intricate patterns. The massive black wolf at Ilara's side snarls, its teeth bared, ember eyes fixed on Roman with predatory focus. "I invoke ancient right," Ilara declares, his voice rising to carry across the entire territory. "As the eldest alpha, as first blood, as the father whose bloodline has been poisoned by treachery and cowardice, I claim dominance over the Crescent Moon Pack and all its territories. Nero Bernard, you are stripped of your title. Roman Bernard, you are declared oathbreaker and traitor to the ancient laws." "You can't," Nero starts, but his protest dies as wolves begin appearing at the edges of the territory. Dozens of them, then hundreds, alphas from neighboring packs drawn by the supernatural pull of Ilara's power and the ancient call to witness justice. Abigail recognizes some of them. Alpha Marcus of the Silver Ridge Pack, Alpha Helena of the Mountain Crest Pack, other regional leaders who've maintained the southern territories for decades. They approach with wary respect, their eyes fixed on Ilara with a mixture of awe and fear. "Alpha King Ilara," Marcus says, his voice carefully neutral. "We felt your presence. We came to observe." "Then observe this," Ilara says. "Nero Bernard murdered my first mate Lyanna 200 years ago to steal power and territory. Roman Bernard rejected his true mate because of her recessive genetics, then participated in her attempted murder through sacrificial offering. Both have violated the most sacred of our laws, the protection of mates and the honoring of bonds. I demand justice under ancient law." The assembled alphas exchange glances. Helena steps forward, her silver eyes hard. "The evidence." "Abigail Moore stands before you, bearing the rope scars and the broken bond. My son and grandson do not deny their actions, only claim they were legal." Ilara's hand finds Abigail's, his fingers lacing through hers with possessive certainty. "And I am here, Nero's father whom he has hidden for 3 decades, whose mate was killed and whose bloodline has been desecrated." Marcus nods slowly. "Under ancient law, trial by combat is permitted for crimes against blood bonds." "No," Roman says, his voice rising with panic. "I'm the heir. You are nothing," Ilara says quietly. "But you will have your chance to prove otherwise. Trial by combat. Tomorrow at dawn. Choose your champion or fight yourself, but know this." His golden eyes burn with cold fire. "There is no outcome where you walk away from this with power intact. The only question is whether you walk away at all." Abigail watches Roman's face cycle through rage, fear, and desperate calculation. Beside him, Nero looks like he's aged a century in the past 10 minutes. His carefully constructed empire crumbling around him. "Tomorrow," Marcus declares, his voice carrying the weight of judgment. "Trial by combat. The regional alphas will bear witness. May the goddess have mercy on the guilty." But Abigail knows, watching Ilara's cold smile, that mercy is the last thing Roman Bernard will find in the morning light. The ceremonial combat circle has been prepared in the center of the Crescent Moon Pack's territory, and Abigail can feel the weight of 1,000 wolf eyes on her as she stands beside Ilara. The gathered alphas from 7 territories form a wall of judgment around them, their presence a reminder that this is no longer a pack matter. This is international law, ancient law, the kind that gets written into history with blood and fire. Roman stands across from her, dressed in full ceremonial armor, his chin lifted in that arrogant way she once thought was confidence. Behind him, Alpha Nero watches with the careful stillness of a wolf who knows the trap has already closed but hasn't accepted it yet. The rest of the Crescent Moon Pack fills the spaces between the visiting alphas, their faces a mixture of fear and fascination. They're all waiting to see what happens when you try to murder an Alpha King's true mate. The High Arbiter from the Western Territories steps forward, an ancient she-wolf whose authority supersedes even pack law. Her voice carries across the circle like thunder. "Roman Bernard, you stand accused of conspiracy to murder through the unlawful invocation of sacrifice law. You condemned your rejected mate to death in the valley. The ancient code demands trial by combat. Do you accept this judgment?" Roman's jaw tightens, but he nods. "I accept. You may name your champion or fight yourself." For a moment, Abigail thinks he'll fight himself. Roman was always proud, always desperate to prove his strength. But then his eyes slide to his father, to the visiting alphas who are watching him like wolves watch wounded prey, and she sees the calculation click into place. He's not stupid. He knows he can't beat Ilara. No one can beat Ilara. But he doesn't think he needs to. "I name my champion," Roman says, his voice steady. "Beta Marcus of the Crescent Moon Pack." A massive wolf steps forward from the crowd, and Abigail recognizes him immediately. Marcus, the beta who served Nero for 30 years, who's legendary for his brutality in combat, who's never lost a challenge. The crowd murmurs with approval. It's a smart choice. Marcus is younger than Ilara by centuries, faster, trained in modern combat techniques that the ancient king might not know. Roman's looking at her now, and there's something ugly and satisfied in his expression. He thinks he's found the loophole. He thinks Marcus will fight Elara, and even if Marcus loses, Roman can claim he followed the law, accepted judgment, and distance himself from the outcome. He thinks he's going to survive this. The High Arbiter turns to Abigail and Elara. Alpha King Elara, as the aggrieved party, you may fight or name your champion. Elara's hand rests on Abigail's shoulder, his touch gentle despite the leashed violence radiating from him. He's ready to tear Marcus apart, ready to make Roman watch what happens to wolves who touch what belongs to him. But Abigail has been quiet for too long, invisible for too long, and she's learned something crucial in these past days at Elara's side. Power unused is power wasted. She steps forward before Elara can speak, and her voice carries across the circle with an authority she's never used before. An authority she's earned. I invoke my right as Luna to name the champion. The crowd goes silent. Even the High Arbiter looks surprised. Roman's face drains of color. You don't have that right. You're not. I am Luna to Alpha King Elara, Abigail says, and her wolf surges forward in her voice, lending it weight and power. I am true mate to the Northern King. And by the ancient code, I am matriarch to the bloodline of the North. She lets her gaze slide to Nero, lets him see the reckoning in her eyes. Which makes me matriarch to you, Alpha Nero. And to your son. The implications hit like a shockwave through the assembled wolves. Nero staggers back a step, his face going gray. Because if Elara is his father, and the blood scent doesn't lie, every alpha here can smell the truth of it, then Abigail's claim is valid. She outranks them all. I name my champion, Abigail continues, her voice steady and merciless. Alpha King Elara of the Northern Wolflands. Roman makes a sound like a wounded animal. No, that's not, you can't. The law is clear, the High Arbiter says, and there's something like satisfaction in her ancient eyes. The Luna has named her champion. Do you wish to withdraw your challenge, Roman Bernard? Roman looks at Marcus, at his father, at the gathered alphas who are already backing away from him like he's cursed. If he withdraws, he admits guilt. If he fights, he dies. There's no winning this. There never was. Roman's voice cracks. I accept. The combat circle clears. Marcus steps back, dismissed, his relief visible. Roman stands alone in the center, trembling, and Abigail feels nothing but cold satisfaction as Elara moves to face him. It's not a fight. It's an execution dressed in ceremony. Elara moves like liquid death, centuries of killing distilled into perfect efficiency. Roman manages one desperate lunge before Elara catches him by the throat, lifts him off his feet, and slams him into the ground hard enough to crack stone. The sound Roman makes isn't quite a scream. His wolf tries to emerge, tries to fight, but Elara's dominance presses down like a mountain, forcing submission, forcing surrender, forcing Roman to bare his throat in the ultimate gesture of defeat. You left my mate to die, Elara says, his voice carrying to every corner of the circle. You bound her wrists and dressed her for sacrifice and abandoned her in the cold. For that, the ancient code demands your life. Roman's eyes find Abigail's, desperate, pleading, looking for the mercy he never showed her. She looks away. Elara's claws extend, and it's over quickly, cleanly. Roman Bernard dies in the combat circle, and no one moves to stop it because this is justice, ancient and absolute. When Elara steps back, Abigail moves forward to stand over Roman's body. The pack is silent, watching, waiting to see what the Omega girl they tried to kill has become. I am Luna Abigail Elara, she says, her voice ringing with authority. Matriarch of the Northern bloodline. And I decree the following. The Sacrificial Valley will be dismantled. Every stone, every marker, every trace of that place will be erased. No wolf will be declared unmated sacrifice again. No Omega will be deemed disposable for the convenience of alphas. She turns to face the gathered crowd, meeting their eyes one by one. The old laws that allowed you to discard the vulnerable are ended. Any pack that invokes them will answer to me. And to the Northern King. Nero is on his knees, broken, staring at his son's body. Abigail looks at him and feels nothing but the cold certainty of justice served. "You used ancient law to try to kill me," she tells him quietly. "So I used ancient law to destroy you. Consider us even." The High Arbiter steps forward, her voice formal but approving. "The judgment is complete. The guilty has paid the blood price. Let the word spread to all territories. The Sacrificial Valley is no more, and the laws of sacrifice are ended by decree of the Northern Matriarch." Abigail turns back to Alara, and his hand finds hers, warm and steady and absolutely certain. Together they walk out of the circle, leaving the Crescent Moon Pact to bury its dead and face its future. She is no longer the invisible Omega. She is Luna. She is Matriarch. She is justice embodied. And the North has just begun its reign. Thank you for joining the pact today. If this story pulled you in, make sure to subscribe and tap the moon bell so you never miss the next Alpha Destiny. And tell me in the comments, who should we follow next under the full moon?